My name is Greg Stuber. I'm the president of the Sacramento County Probation Association. And I really want to come here just as the practicality of implementing this. Being a probation officer myself and having actually ran the maximum security units here in Sacramento County, I can say that the 4-hour time limit is really a big safety issue when it comes to us. The reason being is, echoing what other speakers have said, we're dealing with, say, 20 youth, and there's 2 of us in this unit. And our whole job is to rehabilitate them, to have them up in programming. That's what we want to do. One practical reason having them up in programming is then we're not walking the whole line doing room searches and checks. So having them up is a benefit to the officers. But when you have them up and they're coming from different backgrounds, different gangs, we're dealing with youth, and I did this on a regular occasion, who were shooting at each other 3 weeks ago. And they're both locked up now in my unit. And trying to engage and get through that process, it doesn't happen overnight. So there's a lot of times, especially at the beginning when youth come in, it's ongoing fights. The term is fade on sight. If I see you and you're from the other gang, we will fight. And so when these fights happen, we have to break them up. We have to physically engage, which is a safety issue to those that we're having to restrain and to ourselves. I'm not that large of a person, so a 6'2", 240-pound kid is not an easy task for me to have to stop beating up on another minor. When they go into their room, the de-escalation, we're dealing with minors that have a lot of anger issues that we're trying to work with them through too, and trying to de-escalate them in a short period of time or putting a cap and window on that de-escalation is not practical. A lot of times I'd go to the door because we constantly are going to go check with them. How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you okay to come up? You don't know how many times I'd have minors say, don't let me out. Do not let me out right now. If you let me out, I'm going right back on it. And we have plenty of times in my own unit when I was running it where supervisor says, nope, it's been an hour, it's been 2 hours, we got to get them up. We get them up, and within 2-3 minutes, I'm breaking up the fight again. Also, just so you know, at least in Sacramento County, they still get up and go to school. So even if an altercation happened and they're able to be calm enough, you do get them up to go to school. If they tell you, I can't go in that classroom because I'm going to start another fight, then we put them in the day space and you have them do work then. But under the standards of 1 to 10, with being the staff ratio, in order to implement something like this to where you have them up and doing individual programs, which is what this bill would say, you'd have to go to a ratio of 1 to 5, if not even more than that. And I would be more than willing to have that conversation and look into that, but that's a great cost to the county, and I can tell you the Board of Supervisors aren't going to start handing over millions of dollars to our chiefs. But I think the conversation happens first with the resources on ways that we can handle this and deal with it, and we'd be more than welcome to have that dialogue moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there others in opposition? Seeing and hearing none, I wonder, Senator Leno, if you'd like to address some of these concerns.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the love that was expressed. I return it, but at the same time, I've got to clear the air here. If there's a problem with the definition of the bill, come to the author's office and offer amendments. Absolutely no amendments with regard to standards or even the definition have been offered to us. So I can't negotiate and debate among myself. We need some suggestions. Put them in writing. Let's have that conversation. That has not yet happened. We've heard some conflicting information from the opponents of the bill. Quote, a practice we do not use. Quote, a practice should be rare. Situations where a ward is extremely violent. Youth with anger issues. Is a suggestion that a youth with anger issues who is locked up in solitary confinement is going to improve those anger issues? Clearly not. Every 15 minutes they get counseling. That is not what happens. Every 15 minutes, someone may walk by and look in. But guess what? Even with that 15-minute monitoring, a 16-year-old girl in solitary confinement in San Diego County killed herself. How did that happen? And it was, I don't want to suggest conveniently overlooked, but the bill says that the 4-hour limit is per incident. Per incident. That's a huge difference from what you've just heard. So if someone's there just to cause trouble and to act out, and they come out or they tell you, let me out, I'm going to act out again, boom, the clock starts again. And after how many rounds of 4 hours do you have to make an assessment that this is a mental health issue? And then it shifts to a different situation and a different category of response. I am open to suggested amendments. Please bring them to me. But I think that we as a state can agree that this has no beneficial value. There is no rehabilitation in this practice. And though it has been stated that it is a practice that is not used, in a LA Probation County report from October of 2014 regarding the use of, quote, special housing unit, SHU, I think we all know what a SHU is, 43% of youth at Camp Scudder and 33% of youth in Camp Miller spent more than 24 hours in isolation. In Contra Costa County, there's ongoing federal lawsuit alleging the use of solitary confinement on youth with disabilities who are also denied education as punishment. One 13-year-old girl in the juvenile hall in Contra Costa County who has bipolar disorder and ADHD was allegedly, it's been considered right now, held in isolation for more than 100 days. In Santa Cruz, it was reported in August of 2014 that a youth was left in an 8x10 isolation cell with no windows for 23 hours daily. And then I've already shared with you the tragedy in San Diego County. So I think we all agree that this is not a practice we want to use. So how do we together figure out what should be put in statute, because there's nothing there right now? And with regard to Title 15, my understanding is there are no time limits. We need to put something in statute. I think we're friendly enough that we can find some common ground. We have to do something, because the practice, I think, again, we can agree, is inhumane, it's ineffective, it's barbaric, and it is torturous. And it has, probably most importantly, tragic outcomes.
Thank you very much. I do have a couple of questions for you, and other members of the committee may as well. In listening to the opposition testimony, it does seem to me there might be staffing ratio issues. Here, I'm trying to look at the whole picture. You know, I know that a few years ago we drastically limited the number of young people in our juvenile facilities. And I know that as a result of that, we do tend to have young people who are more angry, more disturbed, more violent than when we had much greater numbers. So the question is how one has some kind of therapeutic and rehabilitative interaction with them. So I do think that at some point this might take a whole hearing of where we are with our juvenile justice system right now. Are the staff ratios adequate? What kind of training are the correctional counselors and the probation officers given for dealing with these young people? And then particularly the issue that was raised from Sacramento about gang activity that may have brought a young person to juvenile hall, and how can that setting become a setting that can heal when people go back on the street, as well as just keeping people from violent interactions with each other while they're inside. And I don't know, I'd like to find out more about what that training looks like and what the practice looks like. But I do think we're dealing with a lot of young people with mental health issues. And I did wonder in reading the bill, when we talk about sending them to an appropriate mental health facility, what is there? Our state hospitals are appendages of our state prison system right now. Is that where we would take a young person? In my county, the only other mental health facilities that I know about are the places where you can send somebody for 72 hours. So as you were researching your bill, what did you come up with? Where would a young person who is considered mentally ill be taken in a system like this if they weren't isolated from the other young people?
I think your more holistic concern, approach, and consideration is a valuable one, and it is something we need to talk about. The specific answer to your question is clearly it would depend upon what county the ward is in, because there are different levels of resources. That's a concern as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking in the counties I represent, I don't know if there is any place to take those young people. There may be, but it's something that I think it actually doesn't bear very much on this particular bill, except that the bill calls for a solution that may not exist, that we ought to look at in a broader perspective. I mean, these are very serious issues.
And I can get a more specific response to your question for you.
Okay, yeah. Other than that, I would simply say that to the opposition, some of the technical issues that have been raised, and my experience is that when you're writing legislation, if you can envision what works, you can put it in language. And I really hope that you would work with Senator Leno. I'm going to support his bill today because I think it sets some very important markers for us. But I think that he said he's willing to work with you to try to find language that gives the flexibility and the certainty that we need to improve the system that we have now. But Senator Stone and Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Senator Leno, for bringing your concern to us here today. I'm a little concerned that we have the Chief Probation Officers Association that's here, that the California Correctional Peace Officers Association is here. These are the boots on the ground that have to deal with protecting all the inmates, those that are more serious than others. And it seems to me, well, first of all, your Chief Probation Officers Association made a very important comment here today. She says that we don't use solitary confinement. And in talking with my Chief Probation Officer, Mr. Hake, who opposes the bill, he claims the same. We have the Board of State and Community Corrections, BSCC, that has regulations that guard the practice of separation, which I think is another way of saying solitary confinement in accordance with your definition. These regulations are reviewed every 4 years with a broad, inclusive set of stakeholders, including but not limited to probation institution administrators, youth advocate groups, pediatricians, mental health professionals, juvenile justice commissions, and others. And these Title 15 regulations on separation were most recently revised, effective in April of 2014, almost a year ago. So I'm concerned that we have oversight of some of these potentially very dangerous individuals. We have people that are in our juvenile justice facilities that may be guilty of murder, of mayhem, that are just waiting to become adults to go to some of our adult prisons, many with gang affiliations. And of course, it's regrettable to hear about a child in San Diego County that may have committed suicide, which is difficult to understand when we see that by law, they're supposed to be observed, upwards of every 15 minutes. So I'd like to learn more about how that happened. But I'm reading your definition of solitary confinement on page 4. line 15, and under the definition, the treatment protocols between staff and a ward placed in the room does not prevent the ward from being considered in solitary confinement. So, why do we have highly trained staff who work in the ward as often as every 15 minutes to hopefully get the ward back into the main program? And I would agree with some staff that sometimes 4 hours just may not be enough, when in fact they can go back in there, get into another fight, and then they have another incidence of another 4 hours, and it's like just a repetitive situation that puts some of the more nonviolent prisoners, if you will, in harm's way of getting injured or in a horrible situation, killed. Not to mention the staff concerns as well. They have certain ratios, and I know coming from counties that they don't have a whole lot of money with AB 109 realignment to increase that ratio to 1 to 5 as was suggested, which would be, of course, better, but better means more money. So those are a few of my concerns, and I'll just continue on and maybe you can answer them all. Your sponsors have told my staff that the goal of the bill is to eliminate the practice known as 23-in-1, but I understand that the State Division of Juvenile Justice abolished that practice a few years ago. In its place, it adopted the federal court-approved detailed set of guidelines governing wards to be used in place of the 23-1. It's about 55 pages and govern every aspect of the ward's treatment, all with the goal of returning the ward to the general population as soon as possible. So I'd like to know what's wrong with those procedures. And we've heard, how do we deal with an inmate that's ill, that wants to be alone because they fear that somebody within the ward is going to hurt them? And then the conflicts that we hear with other regulations. How do we rationalize how we deal with these consequences? Because as I'm learning here, Senator Leno, in my first year in the legislature, it seems as though many people that come to see me are dealing with the unintended consequences of new legislation. Now we have to have more legislation to fix the legislation because we didn't think of this ramification or that ramification. And I'm hearing that we're in conflict with other policies and procedures, maybe in fact laws, within the state of California. And how do we reconcile those? And then lastly, again, these are the boots on the ground that have to deal with some very challenging situations with some very challenging ratios. And I'll be honest with you, one of my top priorities is making sure that my chief probation officers are safe and making sure that my correctional officers are safe. And they're putting themselves in harm's way every day with some people that, unfortunately, even though they're considered youngsters, they're not adults, some of them are very dangerous individuals and may need to be isolated. So I appreciate your...
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask you to answer those questions. I'm going to remind the members we adjourn at 12. We have 6 more bills to go. So if people could sum up their questions quickly.
This is a conversation we can continue offline, Senator. I heard a couple of things. Number one, again, we don't use this practice. Your own chief probation officer said we don't use it. But then you went on to describe situations where we need to use it. And so are we or aren't we? Clearly we are. We've documentation of abuse of it. We're calling things by different names. This is not about going back to correct legislation we already put into statute. We don't have anything in statute. That's the problem here. We don't even have a definition in statute of what we're talking about. That's what we're trying to do with this bill. And again, if those who are opposed to the current definition have some suggested language that they could support, please provide it. But I haven't gotten the first word on paper from anybody yet. So completely open to find some common ground here. But again, Warren Institute at UC Berkeley School of Law in a 2014 report, so that's very recent, not quite as old as the testimony that we heard from Mr. Cortillo. It found that youth in the most restrictive state program, which is known not as solitary confinement, but it's called behavior treatment program. So again, another name for the same thing. were typically there for 60 days. So I'm not suggesting that this is going on in your county or my county for 60 days, but we've got a couple of camps for youth in California where it was recently identified that this is happening. So let's find some common ground for the definition first, and then what are the parameters, not in a 55-page regulation, but into statute. What are the standards? And with regard to lack of funding for appropriate staffing, certainly putting our institutions at risk of lawsuits and the expense of these lawsuits isn't going to help us find additional money to put where it's needed. So for all these reasons, I think we need to come up with something. And I'm happy to talk to you further about it.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Senator Anderson.
Senator, I agree with you. I believe that there's a problem. If you have somebody there for 60 days, that's an issue. What I'm troubled with is I don't know that that this is the cure. When we're talking about the ratios and what we have, if you had a series of fights and you were having to deal with it, now the 60 days is off the charts. I mean, I get that entirely. But if somebody was there for 5 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours, it may not be an abuse. It may be a result of not having the personnel to do all the things. I mean, what we set out is our goal of coming by every 15 minutes and checking up. If there's a fight going on and it requires the probation officer to be involved with that, to break it up, we have a lot of demands on these skills, and I get that every day is not the same amount of pressures. I mean, maybe one day is a pressure cooker, the next day everyone's smooth and unfocused, and they don't have the problems. But it's during those peak periods that I think that some of the problems occur. So if an officer's not available to come by every 15 minutes, they may not be available to release that person back into the population or to properly evaluate that person coming back into the population because it's so electrically charged with emotions. So my concern with this is I wish we came from a point of view of really looking at the ratios to see if these are the correct numbers, and also looking at whether we're giving it the proper oversight. I mean, the fact that we can go 60 days, that's outrageous. But I don't know that this is going to change that, because I don't think that anybody is setting out saying it's our goal to harm a young person. I think that all probation officers get involved with their field because they want to improve their community and think that they can give back to young people. So I'm having difficulty supporting it today. I'm open to the idea. I think that you've clearly focused in on where there are some problems. I'm just not sure that this is the solution to answer those. And what I'm worried about is that it may be some window dressing where I don't see how it changes the 60-day issue. Yeah, I don't see how it changes if we have multiple fights in the same day in the same ward, and all of a sudden you've got 3 officers and 30 young people. That's a lot of oversight. And when you think of the age groups and where they are emotionally, physically, and all the other components, I think that I agree with the chair. I think that we need to really look at how we're viewing this in a holistic fashion. And I'm afraid that this bill in its current state isn't going to address those issues in a meaningful enough way that we have a place. So let's say we identify that there is a problem with mental illness, but we've done nothing to really address it. Saying that they're going to be in the general population creating havoc, and I'm not saying through any fault of their own. I mean, they may be mentally ill, but without addressing it in a meaningful way, I'm just concerned that we're going to create more havoc, because every time they come back into that population, they may be stirring the pot and creating more havoc. And so, you know, we have an obligation to that young person who's there for 60 days wrongfully, and I agree with you. But we also have an obligation to the other 9 people in their ward to ensure that they have a path, that they can get to school, that they can get an education, that they can put their life, you know, the fact that that we may have somebody there who has a really light sentence. I mean, light sentence in the fact that maybe they spray painted, and they're in there with somebody who committed murder. I mean, that's very concerning to me as well, that we're mixing these populations, and there's a variety of where they are in what is an appropriate penalty for them. So I think that I think that you brought up an incredibly important issue. I just think that I'd like to see this perhaps as a hearing, and that we evaluate this stuff to come up with a more holistic approach. I'm worried that this bill will only make us feel good, but it won't accomplish the goal that you set forth. So I won't be supporting it today, but I am open to the idea. I think you're onto something. Thank you.
Senator Monning.
Very briefly, I just want to thank the author for bringing this forward and to underscore, which I'm sure you'll do in your close, the invitation to opponents, because I think there's not anyone up here who doesn't share the concern about safety of officers, safety of other inmates. That's paramount, and what I hear from the author is an absolute commitment to find that balance that doesn't sacrifice protection for what I think is an absolutely necessary conversation and needed reform, and we have a vehicle to make that happen. So again, I thank the author for bringing this forward, and we'll be supporting it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Is there a motion on the bill?
I so move.
Okay. The motion is do pass as amended to appropriations. Would you like to close?
Very briefly, you've been very gracious with your time already. If I've heard anything from the debate and conversation with the committee, it's that the testimony notwithstanding, this is a practice that is used, and it is a practice that needs to be used. We just need to refine the parameters. But clearly it's being used. I don't know why California should be any different from the states of Alaska, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, Missouri, New York, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. All of these jurisdictions have banned the punitive use of solitary confinement, or by what other name you want to use. We can do something similar, and I would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Leno. I am sure you could tell by the comments from the committee, that this touches a deep ethical nerve, and we're trying to figure out what to do in the confines of the system we're working in. I think this bill is very important to start to get clarity, to eliminate the punitive use of solitary, make clear that that is not acceptable anymore in this state. And I appreciate the author's willingness to work on the technical details so that this becomes a truly workable system. Because I also agree with Senator Anderson, or whoever said 55 pages of regulations almost guarantees you that nobody really knows what they're supposed to do. I remember, our oil spill discussions where we had so many notebooks of what to do to clear up an oil spill, but nobody had read them. So let's work together to get that clarity and improve our systems, and I certainly support the bill today. Please read the roll.
Hancock.
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Anderson.
No.
Anderson, no. Leno.
Aye.
Leno, aye. Lou. Lou, aye. McGuire. Monning.
Aye.
Monning, aye. Stone.
No.
Stone, no.
4-2, we're going to hold the roll open for the absent member. Senator Block is